Hello. I'd like to introduce you all to the founders of Airbnb. Now, this image may surprise some of you because you thought the founders of Airbnb were three broke guys in their 20s in San Francisco in 2008. And you'd be right. But you'd also be wrong. What I'd like to do today is share the story of some wave makers who could well be considered the founders of Airbnb. So let's start with this handsome couple. They met at Yale Law School, married in 1965, did a stint in Paris, and then settled into life in New York City. This is Tim and Nina, who don't sound much yet like tech innovators, right? So let's jump to 1979, where they're hosting a dinner party in their Upper West Side apartment with their friends, all serious diners, foodies. And the conversation turns to how professional restaurant reviews are failing the dining public. In particular, the reviewers themselves are criticized for pettiness and lack of range. Tim is struck by the innovator's lightning bolt. We can do this better ourselves. Not just better, but different. Tim issues typewritten surveys to 10 of his friends who pass it along chainmail style to their friends. They gather 200 responses that rate restaurants on food, service, decor, price, along with snippets of comments, and they compile it into their first ever survey of New York City restaurants. Now, some of you may have an inkling of where I'm going with this, and perhaps some of you have remembered Tim and Nina's last name, Zagat. At the time, the Zagat survey was groundbreaking, and it served as the first place for eaters to share their own opinions. It rapidly grew, became their full-time job. By 2005, the survey had 70 global locations around the world. And on their website, the Zagats declare themselves the original provider of user-generated content. And in 2011, the innovator's dream comes true when Google buys Zagat for $125 million. Nice, huh? Now, I'd like to credit the Zagats with something more than user-generated content. I'd like to credit them with starting a movement towards something that you might call decentralized validation or crowd authentication. Those are big phrases that mean you trust the opinion of someone you've never met. Think about it, though. This is the critical enabler of so many technology companies founded in the last 20 years. This is the ripple started by Tim and Nina Zagat way back in 1979. You see, I work at the Institute for the Future, a nonprofit think tank in Palo Alto where we help people and organizations think systematically about the future. And we are particularly interested in the intersection of technology and society. Over the last couple of decades, one of the things we've been observing is the transfer of trust. So let me walk you through an example of this. It used to be that when you suspected you were sick, you went to a doctor for his expert opinion and advice. After the birth of the internet, we started researching online expert websites. You might have visited a place like WebMD, where you were delighted to have access to multiple doctors' opinions. As the internet grew, so did our awareness of health solutions, and we expanded our search for healthcare providers and healthcare advice. But as the internet grew, it also became challenging to identify a knowledgeable source. And so we asked our friends for recommendations, just like the Zagats did back at that fateful dinner party. And our friends recommended their friends who they thought could have suggestions about where we could find healthcare advice. And in the past decade, people have found that crowdsourced advice on places like eHow and Yelp and Reddit. We have made a full transition from going to a doctor who has a decade or more of medical training to perusing the chatter and conversations to ask the opinion of the collective, a collective of strangers. Untrained strangers now often start the direction of our medical care. And I apologize to you pre-med students out there about this. Can you see how, in 1995, eBay relied on a similar transfer of trust? In many ways, eBay's just a bulletin board, right? You post what you have for sale, and people stroll by to see if there's anything that they want to purchase. Ooh, we're clicking away here, folks. The hurdle for eBay was the timing of payment and getting the product. How did I know the seller was going to send me the item that I paid for? So eBay co-opted the movement started by the Zagat's group opinions and integrated a rating system that hopefully signaled the trustworthiness of the seller. I certainly don't hesitate to buy a used book from a seller with 49,872 positive reviews. Do you? So let me take us back to Airbnb. You see, I don't think of Airbnb as a technology company. Sure, they're huge. And on any given night, 2 million people worldwide are staying at an Airbnb. But what is stunning about the growth of Airbnb is that they exemplify this transfer of trust in the arena with the highest of stakes, letting strangers access your home, your safe space. Imagine a decade ago saying to your grandparents, "You know that back bedroom you guys never use? You're going to rent it out for one night to someone you've never met before and who you're never going to meet again." They'd say you're crazy, right? Young, reckless. They'd talk about petty thieves, maybe axe murderers, and never letting a stranger sleep down the hall from themselves. But the timing was right for Airbnb, not because that technology was ready to enable the vision of the creators, but because society was ready to accept that concept. Airbnb is just a matching company, just like Uber, just like eBay. Airbnb, those founders built on the transfer of trust that was started by the Zagats, allowing us to welcome strangers into our homes. Strangers who have built up ratings that we can see before we welcome them to stay. Strangers who can read what past guests say about you as a host before they decide to forego a fairly predictable hotel experience and take a chance on you. And by the way, let's celebrate those grandparents out there who are now happily serving as Airbnb hosts, because they're my heroes. Now, this is not to neglect or downplay the hard work put in by Brian, Nathan, and Joe, the founders of Airbnb back in 2008. And perhaps I'm cavalier to call the Zagats the founders of Airbnb. But they are clearly the critical innovators that laid the foundation for Airbnb. And this foundation, this innovation, it was not technology. It was trusting the opinions of others, building an online reputation, and building a business on it. So I hope you see now that there's a difference between innovations in technology and innovations in society, and that there's a difference between innovators and founders. Sometimes they're one and the same, and sometimes founders are following a path paved by innovators. Like a pebble dropped into a lake, innovators create ripples that can escalate into waves. Founders sometimes ride those waves. Thank you.